Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. We're taking a close look today at, well, a specific stack of source material you've shared with us. These are excerpts from an audio broadcast featuring Alex Jones.
That's right. And our goal here, really, for this deep dive is just to explore the key claims, the perspectives, the details presented specifically within these excerpts, basically to help you get a quick handle on the core elements of this particular content you brought to us.
Yeah, and it's quite a mix, isn't it? The source material itself, I mean, it kind of jumps around. You get these broad geopolitical claims, but then suddenly there are personal anecdotes and even like direct responses to criticism.
Exactly. It gives you a few different angles just within these clips. So maybe let's start by looking at some of the major claims, the ones that pop up near the beginning of these excerpts.
Okay. Well, one of the first big ones is the assertion that social engineers are in overdrive trying to start a civil war. That's quite a statement to lead with.
It certainly is a very strong claim. And tied pretty closely to that, the source material also includes this claim that certain news agencies, I think it specifically mentions a French news agency in the Associated Press, supposedly they admit that the United States, but also France and many other nations of the world, are in a civil war against globalism.
So the way it's presented in the source, it's like these mainstream outlets are actually confirming this idea, this civil war against globalism thing.
That's how it's framed within the clip, yeah. And the source then kind of contrasts this with what it presents as a big shift. It says, society has moved from people denying there's a private corporate global government to now basically having to admit it out in the open.
Okay, that phrase, private corporate global government. In this context, it sounds like it's referring to some kind of perceived hidden power structure, run by corporations, maybe international bodies. And the source suggests this is now being openly talked about or admitted.
Yes, exactly. It sort of builds this narrative within the material itself that suggests, things people might have dismissed before are now becoming undeniable. So as you listen to this specific source material yourself, maybe think about those opening claims. What stands out to you about how they're framed and presented right there at the start?
Okay, but then from these really big, kind of intense claims, the source takes, well, a fascinating turn. It goes somewhere incredibly personal. It includes this little story about swimming in Barton Creek on a Sunday.
Yeah, it's quite the shift, isn't it? Just this seemingly everyday detail about getting in the water after some rain. He mentions the creek was flowing pretty fast and full.
Right. And then the consequence, as he describes in the source, getting a big earache and a sore throat later on, which he blames on runoff and a lot of bacteria, even though he says it looks totally clean.
Mm-hmm. And he follows that up by mentioning using colloidal silver to feel better, which, pops up in some alternative health discussions. Its effectiveness is, well, it's debated. But he then links this directly to his voice. Says it might sound a little bit deeper, or maybe he's talking a little bit slower. And that's his explanation for why he might go to videos here and there during the broadcast.
And this whole personal health thing, the earache and stuff, is explicitly given as the reason he almost stayed home, but decided not to because, and this is a quote, there's too much news.
It really raises an interesting question when you're looking at your source material here. What is the effect of mixing these very personal, almost, vulnerable details like catching a bug from swimming with those huge, intense claims about civil war and globalism? How does that specific blend work within the communication itself? What's it doing there?
Good question. Okay, so moving on from the personal anecdote. The source material also takes time to directly address the speaker's own past behavior and to respond to criticism. There's a statement where he actually acknowledges getting, quote, so wild-fighting the globalist and so teleprompter-free that he has said some things I shouldn't have.
Right. And right in that section, there's an explicit apology offered. He says, I apologize, everybody. It's just that things have gotten so wild, it's really hard to hold back sometimes. And then he tries to make a connection, asking the listener if they can also probably register with that. Can you relate?
And then the source kind of pivots. It starts addressing a specific piece of criticism, mentioning a story that was published in Spin magazine.
Yeah, and according to how the source describes it, this criticism called him a bootlicking, scumbag who worships the government now because he supports Trump so much. That's the gist presented.
Okay, so how does the speaker push back against that within the source clip?
Well, he strongly denies being part of the establishment. Right. That's key. His argument, as it's laid out right here, is that he supports Trump because Trump is anti-establishment. He says Trump's being attacked from all sides and lists things like big corporations, foreign countries, you name it, specifically calling out Hollywood, MSM, everything, and the big banks.
MSM, yeah, that usually means mainstream media in these contexts.
Right. And his stated goal, again, as presented right here in the source, is wanting a constitutional republic back so I don't have to be enemies with the government, and wanting prosperity. He just dismisses that Spin magazine story as disinformation and garbage.
You know what's really fascinating here, just looking strictly at your source material, is how the speaker uses that idea of Trump as anti-establishment, as the main defense against being called, a bootlicker or part of the system. It completely reframes his support through that one specific lens. It's a very direct counter-argument within the narrative.
It really shows how the source is actively working to position the speaker and his actions, in direct response to these external criticisms that are mentioned right there in the clip itself.
It's also worth pointing out that within the source material you sent over, Alex Jones himself is referred to in a few different ways by others in the clip. It's not just his own voice.
Yeah, that's true. The descriptions mention range a bit. You get fairly neutral terms like talk show host, but also more, let's say, loaded ones like conspiracy theorist or even wildly popular conspiracy theorist.
Oh.
And then there's one characterization included where someone calls him deeply, I think, racist.
And there's that brief but pretty pointed exchange about guns, too. Someone is heard saying, "I don't want that man to have a gun." And the speaker's response is immediate, very sharp. 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearm.
Right. So these little inclusions, these brief moments, they offer these kind of contrasting external perspectives or reactions to the speaker. They're presented right there within the source, adding maybe another layer to how he's being portrayed or perceived, beyond just his own self-description.
Okay, and then finally, the source material gives us a little peek ahead. It mentions upcoming content plans, which kind of shows the practical side of the broadcast being presented.
It mentions plans to cover it all and a whole bunch of clips, and something about having a bunch of guests coming up soon.
And there's some specific logistics detailed, too, for covering the Trump address to Congress, which was apparently happening that evening, according to the timing in the broadcast. The source says they're starting coverage at 7:00 Central on Infowars.com show, planning to do an hour before and an hour after with analysis and phone calls.
Yeah, and it also lists the various ways people can watch or listen: YouTube, Facebook, audio feeds. And it mentions that affiliate pickup is welcome, and that specific feed will be, quote, family-friendly, which is interesting, indicating how they're presenting that particular screen.
Right, and the promo line that's dropped in the source material is clear. Watch the free stream live at Infowars.com/show.
So that whole section, while it's mostly just logistics, it shows you within your source material how the broadcast actively guides its audience, tells them how to continue engaging with their content.
So, okay. We've done a pretty deep dive into this specific source material you shared with us. We've looked at those bold claims about civil war and globalism, that really unexpected personal story about the creek swim and the earache. We talked about the responses to criticism, about supporting Trump, about past behavior, and also those different external characterizations that are presented right there within the clip itself.
Yeah, and we really focus specifically on just extracting and highlighting the information and maybe the ways it's presented within the source material you provided.
Yeah.
Just laying out the different threads and maybe some of the rhetorical moves you can see.
Exactly. And so as you reflect on this specific source and how it kind of weaves all these different elements together, here's maybe a final thought for you to chew on. How do seemingly really different things, like a personal health issue, huge political claims, apologies for past actions, external labels from critics, how do they all get combined within a single piece of communication like this one? And what does that specific combination, that blend, maybe reveal about the strategy behind constructing a message in, well, today's pretty complex information landscape?